Admiral Kethvar stood on the bridge of his massive warship, looking out at the stars through the clear metal windows. His ship was called the Divine Thunder, and it was one of the biggest ships in the Zephyrian Empire's navy. The Empire ruled over 847 different star systems, and everyone knew they were the strongest force in the galaxy. The Admiral was proud of his people. The Zephyrians had blue skin that sparkled like precious stones, and they were very tall and elegant. Their ships were beautiful too, made of crystal and metal that shone with bright lights. These ships could destroy whole planets if they wanted to. For 3,000 years, no one had dared to fight them. "Admiral," said his second-in-command, Captain Veltar, "we have found a strange ship near the fourth planet in this system." Kethvar turned around. His golden eyes glowed with interest. "What kind of ship?" "It appears to be from a species we have not seen before. They call themselves humans. The ship is small and plain-looking, nothing like our beautiful vessels." The Admiral walked to his command chair and sat down. "Bring the ship on our viewing screen." The large screen at the front of the bridge showed a ship that looked very different from Zephyrian vessels. It was gray and simple, with no decorations or bright lights. To Kethvar, it looked like a piece of metal that someone had thrown together quickly. "Open a communication channel," he ordered. The screen changed to show the inside of the human ship. A woman with short brown hair was sitting in a captain's chair. She was wearing a blue uniform with some small metal badges on it. She looked calm and relaxed. "Greetings," the woman said with a smile. "I am Captain Sarah Chen of the United Earth Ship Endeavor. We are on a peaceful exploration mission." Kethvar stood up tall and proud. "I am Admiral Kethvar of the Zephyrian Imperial Fleet. You are in space that belongs to the Empire. No ship may pass through here without our permission." Captain Chen looked thoughtful for a moment. "Well, Admiral, our maps show this as neutral space. We didn't know anyone claimed it. We're just passing through on our way to study some interesting star formations in the next system." The Admiral felt his anger growing. How dare this primitive creature question the Empire's right to this space? For 1,000 years, no one had challenged their territorial claims. "Your maps are wrong," Kethvar said, his voice getting louder. "This space has belonged to the Zephyrian Empire for centuries. You will surrender your ship immediately and submit to Imperial authority." Captain Chen shook her head slowly. "I'm afraid we can't do that, Admiral. We have our own laws and government, but I'm sure we can work something out. Maybe we could agree to disagree and both go our separate ways?" Kethvar could not believe what he was hearing. This human was refusing a direct order from an Imperial Admiral. Such disrespect had not happened in his lifetime. His crew members were looking at each other with shocked expressions. "You dare refuse the will of the Empire?" Kethvar shouted. "Do you not understand who you are speaking to? I command the 5th Imperial Fleet. We have destroyed entire civilizations for less than this insult." Captain Chen remained calm. She even looked a little amused. "Admiral, I think there might be some misunderstanding here. We're not trying to insult anyone. We just want to continue our peaceful mission." The Admiral's pride was hurt badly. He had never been spoken to like this by anyone, especially not by someone from a species he had never heard of before. He decided to teach these humans a lesson they would never forget. "Very well," Kethvar said, his voice cold and threatening. "Since you refuse to show proper respect to the Empire, I will give you one chance to avoid complete destruction. You will contact your entire fleet and order them to come here. They will have 7 standard days to arrive and surrender to Imperial justice." Captain Chen raised her eyebrows. "Our entire fleet? Admiral, that seems like quite an escalation. Are you sure you want to do that?" "I am completely sure," Kethvar replied. 7 days. If your fleet does not arrive and surrender, the Empire will hunt down every human ship in the galaxy and destroy them. This is the price of your arrogance." The human captain was quiet for a long moment. She seemed to be thinking about something. Then, to the Admiral's surprise, she started to smile. The smile grew bigger until she was clearly trying not to laugh. "Admiral," she said, her voice shaking a little with suppressed laughter, "you might want to reconsider that decision." Kethvar felt his face turn darker blue with rage. "Are you laughing at me? At the might of the Empire?" "Not at you personally," Captain Chen said, getting her laughter under control. "It's just that challenging our entire fleet might not go the way you think it will." "Your threats do not frighten me," the Admiral said. "I have seen the ships of hundreds of species. They all fall before Imperial power. Your primitive vessels will be no different." Captain Chen shook her head again, but she was still smiling. "All right, Admiral. If that's really what you want, then we accept your challenge. 7 days, you said?" 7 standard days. Kethvar confirmed. "And when your fleet arrives, they will kneel before the Empire, or be destroyed." "I'll pass along your message," the human captain said. "Thank you for the warning time. That's very considerate of you." Kethvar ended the communication and turned to his crew. They all looked excited. This would be the first real battle the Fifth Fleet had fought in many years. Most of the crew had never seen actual combat. "Send word to the Emperor," Kethvar ordered. "Tell him we have found a new species that dares to challenge the Empire. Request permission to make an example of them." Captain Veltar looked worried. "Admiral, the humans seemed very confident. Should we perhaps gather more information about their capabilities before proceeding?" Kethvar waved his hand dismissively. "Confidence means nothing. Every species thinks they are strong until they face Imperial might. These humans probably have a few dozen ships at most. We will crush them easily." Within hours, the message had reached the Imperial capital. Emperor Zarthul himself was amused by the news. It had been so long since anyone had dared challenge the Empire that it would be entertaining to watch their destruction. Meanwhile, Captain Chen's message to Earth was much different. She sat in her private quarters, speaking to the military. Commanders back home through a secure communication link. "So let me understand this correctly," said Admiral Rebecca Torres, the head of Earth's Defense Force. "An alien empire wants our entire fleet to show up so they can force us to surrender?" "That's about the size of it," Captain Chen replied. The Admiral seemed quite sure of himself, very proud of their empire and their ships. Admiral Torres shook her head and smiled. "Well, I suppose we can't disappoint them. It has been a while since we had a good training exercise for the new recruits." "Should I warn them that they might be making a mistake?" Captain Chen asked. "Oh no," Admiral Torres said, her smile getting bigger. "Let's not spoil the surprise. Send word to all Defense Force units. We're going to have visitors, and we want to make sure they get a proper welcome." The challenge had been made and accepted. In 7 days, 2 very different ideas of power would meet in the empty space between the stars. The news of the human challenge spread through the Zephyrian Empire like wildfire. In the great crystal palaces of the capital world, nobles gathered to discuss this amusing development. It had been over 300 years since anyone had been foolish enough to openly defy imperial authority. Emperor Zarthul sat on his throne made of living crystal that pulsed with soft blue light. Around him, his advisors and generals discussed how many ships would be needed to crush these upstart humans. "Your Imperial Majesty," said General Mordak, bowing deeply, "our scouts report that the humans have perhaps 400 ships total. They appear to be scattered across several star systems." The Emperor laughed, a sound like crystal bells ringing. 400 ships? And they think they can challenge us? How delightfully naive. "Should we send a single battle fleet to deal with them?" asked another general. "No," the Emperor said, standing up from his throne. "This will be a perfect opportunity to remind the galaxy why the Zephyrian Empire rules. We will send 3 full battle fleets, over 2,000 of our finest ships." The generals looked at each other with surprise. 3 battle fleets could destroy entire star systems. It seemed like too much force for such a small enemy. Your Majesty, General Mordak said carefully, is that not excessive? Surely one fleet would be more than enough. Emperor Zarthul's golden eyes glowed brighter. This is not about destroying the humans, General. This is about sending a message to every species in the galaxy. When the Empire speaks, the wise listen. When the Empire is challenged, the challengers disappear completely. Within 2 days, the massive Imperial Armada was assembled. The ships gathered in formation above the capital world, their crystal hulls reflecting the light of the system's twin suns. Each ship was a work of art as much as a weapon of war. The smallest destroyers were still larger than most species, biggest battleships. Admiral Kethvar was given command of the entire force. He stood on the bridge of his flagship, now accompanied by 2 other massive dreadnoughts. The sight of so much power made his chest swell with pride. All ships report. Ready for jump to hyperspace, Captain Veltar reported. Excellent, Kethvar said. Begin the jump. Let us go collect our new subjects. Meanwhile, across human space, the reaction to the Imperial challenge was very different from what the Zephyrians expected. On Earth, in the Defense Force headquarters, in Geneva, Admiral Rebecca Torres was having a meeting with her senior staff. But instead of the tense war planning session one might expect, the atmosphere was almost casual. So, Admiral Torres said, looking at the reports on her tablet, the Zephyrian Empire wants to show us the error of our ways. How thoughtful of them. Commander Lisa Park, the Defense Force's intelligence chief, pulled up a holographic display, showing the approaching Imperial fleet. Our long-range sensors show approximately 2,000 vessels heading our way. They should arrive at the meeting point in 5 days. 2,000 ships, Torres mused. That's actually quite impressive for their level of technology. Should we tell the President? I already did, Commander Park replied. She said to handle it however we think best, but try not to create too much of a diplomatic incident. And the civilian population? Asked another officer. Torres smiled. Well, the news networks are covering it, but most people seem to think it's just another training exercise. The betting pools are actually quite entertaining. This was true. Across human colonies and space stations, people were indeed treating the approaching conflict like a sporting event. In bars and cafes, civilians gathered around news screens to watch updates about the Zephyrian Challenge, as the media had dubbed it. On Mars, in a popular restaurant called the Red Rock Cafe, a group of friends were having lunch and discussing the situation. I bet the whole thing will be over in 10 minutes, said Jake, a mining engineer. Remember what happened when the Koroth Confederation tried to raid our shipping lanes last year? His friend Maria, who worked at the terraforming station, shook her head. 10 minutes? You're being generous. I give it 5 minutes, tops. Come on, be fair, said their friend Tom. These Zephyrians have been around for thousands of years. They might last a whole 15 minutes. The conversation was typical of what was happening across human space. People were curious and mildly entertained, but no one seemed particularly worried. At the Defense Force Academy on Luna, the situation was being used as a teaching opportunity. Instructor Captain Williams was explaining to his students how first contact situations could sometimes go wrong. The key thing to remember, he told his class of young cadets, is that every species develops differently. What seems like overwhelming force to one civilization might be completely inadequate to another. A student raised her hand. Sir, are we really just going to use the expeditionary fleet for this? Shouldn't we send something bigger? Captain Williams smiled. Cadet, the expeditionary fleet is perfectly adequate for this situation. Remember, our goal is not to destroy the Zephyrian Empire. It's to help them understand their place in the galactic community. Back in space, the human expeditionary fleet was indeed assembling at the coordinates the Zephyrians had specified. Admiral Torres herself would command the fleet from her flagship, the UES Harmony. The ship looked much like Captain Chen's Endeavor. Functional, clean, but not particularly impressive compared to the ornate Zephyrian vessels. The human fleet consisted of exactly 387 ships. They were crewed mostly by recent Academy graduates and reserve personnel. For most of the crew, this would be their first real deployment, though they had trained extensively in simulations. Ensign David Kim was one of these recent graduates. He stood on the bridge of the destroyer UES Swift Current, watching as more human ships arrived at the meeting point. "Nervous?" asked his friend, Ensign Sarah Okafor, who was manning the communications station. "A little," David admitted. I know we've trained for this kind of thing, but 2,000 enemy ships is still 2,000 enemy ships." Lieutenant Commander Jackson, their captain, overheard them. "Don't worry too much, ensigns. The Zephyrians aren't our enemies. They're just confused about how things work out here." "Sir?" Sarah asked. "The Empire has been the biggest power in their local region for a long time," Jackson explained. "They're used to everyone backing down when they make threats. They don't realize that there are civilizations out here that developed very differently." On the other side of the galaxy, Admiral Kethvar's armada was making its final jump toward the meeting point. The Admiral stood proudly on his bridge, surrounded by holographic displays showing the positions of all his ships. "Admiral, Captain," Veltar reported, "we are detecting human ships at the specified coordinates." "How many?" Kethvar asked. "Approximately 400 vessels, as our intelligence predicted." The Admiral nodded with satisfaction. 400 against 2,000. These humans will learn what happens when primitive species challenge their betters. The Zephyrian fleet dropped out of hyperspace in a magnificent display of power. The crystal ships materialized in perfect formation, their hulls gleaming with energy shields and weapon systems. It was a sight designed to inspire awe and terror in equal measure. Emperor Zarthul himself was aboard one of the command ships, having decided to witness the destruction of the humans personally. He stood on the observation deck, looking out at the small human fleet in the distance. "So few ships," he murmured to his aide. "Almost pitiful, really." "Shall we offer them one final chance to surrender, Your Majesty?" the aide asked. "Of course," the Emperor replied. "We are not monsters. If they kneel now, we will only enslave half their population instead of destroying them entirely." The Imperial fleet moved into attack formation, weapons charging with brilliant energy. On every Zephyrian ship, crews prepared for what they expected to be a very short battle. But on the human ships, the mood was quite different. Admiral Torres sat in her command chair, reading reports from her officers with calm professionalism. "All ships report ready, Admiral," her communications officer announced. "Thank you, Lieutenant. Signal the fleet. Assume standard defensive positions. And someone please send a message to the Zephyrian commander. Let's see if we can resolve this peacefully." As the two fleets faced each other across the empty space, both sides were confident of victory. But only one of them really understood what was about to happen. The space between the two fleets crackled with tension. On one side, the magnificent Zephyrian armada spread across several thousand kilometers, their crystal ships gleaming like jewels against the black of space. On the other side, the much smaller human fleet hung in loose formation, their gray vessels looking almost insignificant by comparison. Admiral Kethvar stood on the bridge of his flagship, surrounded by his senior officers. The main viewing screen showed the human fleet, and the Admiral felt a mixture of disappointment and contempt. "They look even more pathetic up close," he said to Captain Veltar. "Are you certain these are all the ships they have?" "Our sensors confirm 387 human vessels, Admiral," Veltar replied. "No additional ships detected in the surrounding systems." Emperor Zarthul's voice came over the communication system from his command ship. "Admiral Kethvar, you may begin when ready. I want this to be swift and decisive." "Of course, Your Imperial." "Majesty," Kethvar replied with a bow, even though the Emperor could not see him. On the human side, Admiral Torres was reviewing the tactical display with her officers. The Zephyrian fleet was arranged in a classic battle formation that human military academies had been studying for decades. Impressive-looking ships, commented Commander Martinez, Torres's tactical officer. Very pretty. Their formation is textbook, added Lieutenant Singh from the navigation station. Straight out of their military manuals from about 200 years ago. Admiral Torres nodded. Yes, they clearly follow traditional naval doctrine. Has anyone opened a communication channel yet? Yes, Admiral, reported the communications officer. The Zephyrian commander is requesting to speak with you. Put him through. The main screen on the UES Harmony flickered to life, showing Admiral Kethvar in all his imperial glory. His tall, elegant form was draped in ceremonial armor that sparkled, with embedded crystals. Behind him, the bridge of his ship was a marvel of artistic engineering. I am Admiral Kethvar of the 5th Imperial Fleet, he announced formally. You are Admiral Torres, I presume? That's correct, Torres replied with a friendly smile. Thank you for agreeing to meet us here, Admiral. I hope we can work out our differences peacefully. Kethvar's golden eyes flashed with anger. There is nothing to work out. You challenged the authority of the Empire. Now you must face the consequences. Actually, Torres said calmly, you challenged us, remember? You're the one who demanded our entire fleet show up here. Silence, Kethvar shouted. You will surrender immediately, or we will destroy every human ship in the galaxy. This is your final warning. Torres looked thoughtful for a moment. Admiral, before we continue, can I ask you something? How much do you actually know about humanity? The question seemed to catch Kethvar off guard. What does it matter? You are primitives who dare to defy the Empire. That is all I need to know. But you've never actually studied our technology or capabilities, have you? Torres pressed. You're basing your assumptions on what your ships look like compared to ours. Kethvar straightened up proudly. Our ships are the finest in the galaxy. No primitive species could possibly challenge Imperial technology. I see, Torres said sadly. That's unfortunate. Admiral, I'm going to make you an offer. Turn your fleet around right now, go home, and we'll pretend this never happened. No one needs to get hurt. The laughter that erupted from the Zephyrian bridge was like the sound of crystal wind chimes in a storm. Kethvar could barely speak through his amusement. You offer mercy to us? He gasped. 400 ships offer mercy to 2,000? This is the most amusing thing I've heard in centuries. I was afraid you'd say that, Torres replied with genuine regret. In that case, Admiral, you should know that what you're about to see is not our military attacking you. This is our standard defensive protocol for situations like this. Kethvar's laughter stopped abruptly. What do you mean, situations like this? Oh, you know, Torres said casually. When younger civilizations get aggressive and need to be calmed down. It happens more often than you might think. Before Kethvar could respond, Admiral Torres cut the communication. She turned to her crew with a sigh. All right, people. The Zephyrians want to do this the hard way. Activate defensive systems and prepare for non-lethal engagement protocols. Across the human fleet, orders were quietly passed from ship to ship. There was no dramatic scrambling or shouting of commands. Instead, crews calmly activated systems that had been installed on human ships for over a century. On the Zephyrian flagship, Emperor Zarthol had arrived on the bridge to observe the battle personally. He stood next to Admiral Kethvar, both of them watching the human fleet with anticipation. They seem very calm for people about to die, the Emperor observed. Fear affects different species in different ways, Your Majesty, Kethvar replied. Perhaps they are simply too primitive to understand their situation. Begin the attack, the Emperor commanded. Admiral Kethvar nodded to his weapons officer. All ships, open fire. Show these humans the true power of the Empire. The Zephyrian fleet erupted into action. Thousands of energy weapons discharged simultaneously. creating a spectacular display of light and power. Massive particle beams lanced across space toward the human ships, each beam capable of destroying a city. The attack was magnificent to watch. Streams of coherent energy painted brilliant lines across the darkness, converging on the human fleet like the fingers of an angry god. Any normal fleet would have been vaporized instantly, but the human ships simply weren't there anymore. Where? 387 human vessels had been floating moments before. Space was now empty. The massive Zephyrian energy barrage passed harmlessly through the void, missing their targets completely. "What happened?" Emperor Zarthul demanded. "Where did they go?" On the bridge of the Divine Thunder, Admiral Kethvar was staring at his tactical displays in confusion. "Sensors report no human ships in the target area. No debris field detected." "Did they retreat?" Captain Veltar asked. "Impossible," Kethvar replied. "Our sensors would have detected any ships jumping to hyperspace." Then, as suddenly as they had disappeared, the human ships were back. But they were no longer in the same positions. The entire human fleet had somehow moved several thousand kilometers during the few seconds they had been invisible. Admiral Torres's voice came over the communication system, reaching every Zephyrian ship simultaneously. "That was a very impressive display, Admiral Kethvar. Your weapons are quite powerful. Now, would you like to see ours?" On the human flagship, Torres was reviewing the tactical situation with her officers. The brief phase shift had allowed them to analyze the Zephyrian weapons and defensive systems completely. "Assessment, Commander Martinez?" she asked. "Their technology is about where we expected, Admiral," Martinez replied. "Energy weapons based on contained fusion reactions, physical armor plating with basic energy shields, very advanced for their development level, but nothing we haven't seen before." "Any immediate threats to our ships?" "None whatsoever, Admiral. Our defensive systems can handle their entire fleet indefinitely." Torres nodded. "Very well. Initiate containment protocol. Remember, we want to disable their weapons without harming the crews." Back on the Imperial flagship, panic was beginning to set in. Admiral Kethvar was shouting orders at his officers, demanding explanations that none of them could provide. "How did they move without using hyperspace drives?" he demanded. "Unknown, Admiral," his science officer replied nervously. "Our sensors detected no energy signatures consistent with any known propulsion method." "Then scan them again. Find out what kind of ships those are." But before the science officer could comply, something even more impossible happened. The human fleet began to multiply. Where there had been 387 human ships moments before, there were now over 1,000, then 2,000, then 4,000. The human fleet grew until it outnumbered the Zephyrian armada 2-1. Emperor Zarthul grabbed Admiral Kethvar's arm. "Is this some kind of illusion?" I don't know, Your Majesty," Kethvar stammered. "Sensors are reading each ship as solid matter, but this is impossible." Admiral Torres's voice reached them again, still calm and professional. "Admiral, what you're seeing is a combination of several technologies. Some of our ships are using holographic projection to create duplicates. Others are using quantum field manipulation to exist in multiple locations simultaneously. It's all perfectly normal by our standards." "Perfectly normal?" Kethvar whispered. "Oh yes," Torres continued. "These are just standard features on our expeditionary fleet vessels. Nothing too fancy. Now, shall we demonstrate our actual weapons, or would you prefer to discuss surrender terms?" The Admiral looked around his bridge at his terrified crew. For the first time in his long career, Kethvar began to realize that he might have made a terrible mistake. Admiral Kethvar stared at the tactical display showing thousands of human ships, where there had been only hundreds before. His hands trembled slightly as he gripped the railing of his command platform. Nothing in his 3 centuries of military service had prepared him for this. "Admiral," Captain Veltar said quietly, "should we retreat?" Before Kethvar could answer, Emperor Zarthul's voice cut across the bridge. "Retreat? The Empire does not retreat from primitives. Continue the attack." "But, Your Majesty," Kethvar began. "We don't understand their technology. Perhaps we should—" "I said continue the attack," the Emperor shouted. "Use everything we have." Admiral Kethvar reluctantly nodded to his weapons officer. "All ships, concentrated fire. Target the largest human vessels." The Zephyrian fleet opened fire again, this time focusing all their energy weapons on what appeared to be the human command ships. The space between the fleets lit up like a star-going supernova. Enough energy to destroy entire moons lanced toward the human fleet. The beams struck their targets directly. For a moment, the Zephyrians thought they had succeeded. But when the energy dispersed, the human ships were still there, completely undamaged. "Impossible," whispered the Emperor. On the bridge of the UES Harmony, Admiral Torres watched the Zephyrian attack with professional interest. The ship's defensive systems had absorbed the incoming energy and converted it into useful power for the ship's systems. That was actually quite impressive, she told Commander Martinez. Their energy output is nearly 10% higher than our projections suggested. "Should we return fire, Admiral?" asked Lieutenant Singh. Torres shook her head. "Not yet. Let's see if they have anything else to try first. I'd hate to end this before they've had a chance to show us their full capabilities." Across the human fleet, similar conversations were taking place. The crews were treating the Zephyrian attack like a training exercise, calmly monitoring their systems and taking notes on Imperial technology. On the destroyer UES Swift Current, Ensign David Kim was amazed by how routine everything felt. "Is it always like this?" he asked Lieutenant Commander Jackson. "Not always," Jackson replied. "Sometimes the other side figures out they're outmatched before they start shooting. But the ones with big egos usually need a demonstration." On the Imperial flagship, panic was spreading through the crew. The science officer was frantically running scans of the human ships, trying to understand how they had absorbed such massive amounts of energy without taking any damage. "Report!" Admiral Kethvar demanded. "The human ships appear to have some kind of energy absorption system," the science officer said, his voice shaking. "Our weapons aren't just being blocked. They're being converted into power for their systems. Emperor." Zarthul pushed past Admiral Kethvar to stare at the tactical display. "That's impossible. No known technology can do that." "Apparently some technology can," Kethvar said quietly. Admiral Torres's voice came over the communication system again. "Admiral Kethvar, I can see you're confused about our defensive capabilities. Would you like me to explain how they work?" "This is some kind of trick," the Emperor muttered. "Illusions, deceptions. I assure you, Your Majesty," Torres continued, apparently able to hear them, "everything you're seeing is quite real. Our ships use quantum energy absorption fields to convert incoming attacks into useful power. It's actually one of our older technologies. We developed it about 300 years ago." Admiral Kethvar found his voice. 300 years? But that would mean that we've been spacefaring much longer than you realized? Yes, that's correct. We've been quietly exploring this galaxy for quite some time now. The revelation hit the Zephyrian command like a physical blow. If humanity had been in space for centuries, why had they never encountered them before? "Now," Torres continued, "I've shown you our defensive systems. Would you like to see our weapons? I promise we'll be gentle." "No!" Kethvar shouted into the communication system. "Whatever you're planning, don't—" But it was too late. The human demonstration had already begun. There were no dramatic energy beams or massive explosions. Instead, something much more subtle and terrifying happened. The Zephyrian ships simply stopped working. Across the Imperial fleet, weapons systems went offline. Not damaged or destroyed, just turned off. Engine systems shut down peacefully. Life support continued to function, but everything else went dark. On the bridge of the Divine Thunder, Admiral Kethvar watched in horror as every System on his ship powered down except for basic life support and communications. What did they do to us? Captain Veltar whispered. The answer came from Admiral Torres. We've temporarily disabled your weapons and propulsion systems. Your crews are perfectly safe, and we can restore full power whenever you're ready to discuss this situation rationally. Emperor Zarthul was staring at the dead control panels around him. How? How is this possible? Electromagnetic pulse technology, Your Majesty, Torres explained patiently, but very precisely targeted. We can shut down specific systems without affecting others. Again, this is fairly basic technology by our standards. Across the Imperial fleet, similar scenes were playing out on every ship. Crews sat in darkened corridors lit only by emergency lighting. Weapons officers stared at dead control panels. Engineers tried desperately to restart systems that had been shut down by technology they didn't understand. But the most shocking part was still to come. Admiral Kethvar, Torres's voice announced, we're sending boarding parties to your ships. Please don't be alarmed. They're just coming to make sure everyone is safe and to explain what's happening. Boarding parties? Kethvar gasped. But our shields are still up. Our hull armor is intact. Yes, about that, Torres said. Our people don't really need to worry about shields and armor. You'll see. On the Imperial flagship, the crew watched, in amazement as human figures simply materialized on the bridge. They didn't beam in with energy transporters or cut through the hull. They just appeared, as if they had walked through the walls. Admiral Kethvar found himself face to face with a young human woman wearing a simple blue uniform. She had short blonde hair and a friendly smile. Hello, Admiral, she said politely. I'm Lieutenant Sarah Park from the UES Harmony. I'm here to make sure everyone is okay and to answer any questions you might have. How did you get through our shields? Kethvar demanded. Phase shifting, Lieutenant Park replied as if it was the most normal thing in the world. We just adjusted our molecular phase to match your ship's internal structure. It's actually quite easy once you understand quantum physics. Emperor Zarthul stepped forward, his royal robes rustling. Do you know who I am, human, Lieutenant? Park looked at him and nodded respectfully. Yes, Your Majesty. You're Emperor Zarthul of the Zephyrian Empire. It's an honor to meet you, sir. Admiral Torres asked me to give you her regards. The Emperor was speechless. This young human was treating him with polite respect, as if she was meeting a foreign dignitary rather than a conquered enemy. I don't understand what's happening, the Emperor said quietly. I know this is confusing, Lieutenant Park said sympathetically. Admiral Torres would like to speak with you personally if you're willing. She's prepared a briefing that should help explain the situation. Admiral Kethvar looked around his bridge. Human personnel were working alongside his crew, not as conquerors, but as technicians. They were checking systems, making sure the ship was safe, and politely answering questions from confused Zephyrian officers. You're not here to kill us, he said, more as a statement than a question. Oh, no, sir, Lieutenant Park replied. We're here to help. This is all just a big misunderstanding. The Admiral sat down heavily in his command chair. In less than 10 minutes, everything he thought he knew about warfare, about power, about the galaxy itself, had been turned upside down. What happens? Now? He asked. Lieutenant Park's smile grew warmer. Now, Admiral, you get to learn something new. 2 hours later, Emperor Zarthul found himself in a situation he had never imagined possible. He was sitting in his own throne room aboard his flagship, but across from him sat a human woman drinking tea as if this was a social visit. Ambassador. Elena Vasquez was a middle-aged woman with gray hair and kind eyes. She had arrived shortly after the Imperial fleet had been disabled, along with a small diplomatic team. Now she was calmly explaining to the most powerful being in the Zephyrian Empire why his mighty fleet had been defeated so easily. I hope you understand, Your Majesty, Ambassador Vasquez said, setting down her cup, that what you experienced today was not actually a military engagement. It was a safety demonstration. Emperor Zarthul stared at her in disbelief. Safety demonstration. Yes, the ambassador nodded. When a younger civilization becomes aggressive toward others, we have standard procedures to help them understand the situation before anyone gets hurt. Younger civilization, the Emperor repeated. The Zephyrian Empire has ruled this region of space for over 3,000 years. And that's very impressive, Ambassador Vasquez said warmly. 3,000 years is a significant achievement. Humanity has been watching your progress with great interest. Watching us? Admiral Kethvar, who had been standing silently beside the throne, finally spoke. For how long? Oh, about 200 years now, the ambassador replied casually. Ever since you developed faster-than-light travel, we always keep an eye on species when they start expanding beyond their home systems. The Emperor felt dizzy. You've been watching us for 2 centuries? Of course. It's important to monitor developing civilizations to make sure they don't accidentally hurt themselves or others. Space can be dangerous when you're just learning how to navigate it. Admiral Kethvar stepped forward. But if you've been watching us, why did you never make contact? Ambassador Vasquez smiled. Because you weren't ready yet. First contact is a delicate process. We've learned it's better to wait until a species has matured enough to handle the reality of galactic civilization. And you think we're ready now? The Emperor asked. Well, the ambassador said thoughtfully, attacking peaceful explorers isn't usually a sign of maturity, but your willingness to listen now suggests you might be ready to learn. She activated a small device on the table between them. A holographic display appeared, showing a map of the galaxy that was unlike anything the Zephyrians had ever seen. This is the actual political situation in this part of the galaxy, Ambassador Vasquez explained. The colored areas represent different civilizations and their territories. Emperor Zarthul stared at the map in shock. The Zephyrian Empire, which he had thought covered a significant portion of the galaxy, was just a tiny speck in one corner. Hundreds of other civilizations were marked on the map, many of them controlling far larger territories. This can't be right, he whispered. I'm afraid it is, Your Majesty. The galaxy is much more crowded than you realized. The Zephyrian Empire is actually quite small compared to most established civilizations. Admiral Kethvar pointed at a large blue area that seemed to encompass vast regions of space. What is that? That's the Galactic Cooperation Initiative, the ambassador explained. It's an organization that helps coordinate peaceful relations between different species. Humanity serves as one of the mediating members. How many species belong to this organization? The Emperor asked weakly. Currently, about 14,000 different civilizations, though not all of them are actively involved in interstellar politics. The number was so large that both Zephyrians had trouble comprehending it. 14,000 civilizations, and they had never heard of any of them. But our ships, Admiral Kethvar said desperately. Our weapons, our technology. We're the most advanced species we've ever encountered. Ambassador Vasquez nodded sympathetically. You are indeed very advanced for a species at your level of development. Your crystal-based technology is quite beautiful and efficient. But you have to understand, every species develops differently. She gestured, and the holographic display changed to show various types of spacecraft. The Altarians develop living ships that grow like plants. The Mechanicus Collective builds vessels, the size of small moons. The ethereal communes create ships that exist partially in other dimensions. And humans? The Emperor asked quietly. Humans tend to focus on practical, multi-purpose technology. We're not the most advanced species in the galaxy, but we're good at building things that work reliably in many different situations. Admiral Kethvar was studying the display intently. The ships that defeated us today, what classification are they? Those were expeditionary fleet vessels, the ambassador replied. Essentially our Coast Guard. They're designed for exploration, first contact situations, and light peacekeeping duties. Coast Guard, the Admiral repeated numbly. If it makes you feel better, Ambassador Vasquez added kindly, your ships performed quite well against them. It took almost 8 minutes to disable your entire fleet. That's actually above average for civilizations at your development level. Emperor Zarthul buried his face in his hands. What you're telling me is that we challenged the galactic equivalent of a police force with our entire military, and we lost in 8 minutes. 7 minutes and 33 seconds, actually, the ambassador corrected gently. But who's counting? There was a long silence in the throne room. Finally, Admiral Kethvar asked the question that both Zephyrians were thinking. What happens to us now? Will you destroy our empire, enslave our people? Ambassador Vasquez looked genuinely shocked. Destroy you? Why would we do that? You haven't actually hurt anyone. You just made some threats and fired some weapons that couldn't damage our ships anyway. But we challenged you, the Emperor said. We attacked your fleet. You challenged our Coast Guard, the ambassador corrected with a smile. And then you listened to reason when we explained the situation. That shows wisdom and maturity. She leaned forward in her chair. Your Majesty, the Galactic Cooperation Initiative would like to invite the Zephyrian Empire to join as an associate member. Associate member? It means you would have access to our trade networks, scientific databases, and diplomatic services. In return, you would agree to follow basic galactic law. No attacking peaceful ships, no enslaving other species, things like that. Admiral Kethvar looked suspicious. What's the catch? No catch, Ambassador Vasquez said. Although there is one small requirement. You would need to attend a brief educational seminar about galactic civilization, just to make sure you understand how things work out here. How brief? The Emperor asked cautiously. Oh, only about 6 months. You'd stay on one of our educational stations and learn about interstellar law, proper first contact procedures, basic galactic history, that sort of thing. Emperor Zarthul thought about this for a long moment. 6 months ago, he had believed. He ruled one of the greatest empires in the galaxy. Now he was learning that his empire was a small, backwards nation that had just tried to pick a fight with forces far beyond their understanding. Admiral Torres mentioned something about this not being your actual military, he said finally. Ambassador Vasquez smiled. Oh, you don't want to know about our actual military, Your Majesty. Let's just say that what you saw today was the gentle option. But you're offering us a chance to join your organization anyway? Every species goes through this phase, the ambassador explained. You develop space travel, you get a little cocky, you pick fights with your neighbors. It's perfectly normal. Most civilizations grow out of it once they understand the bigger picture. Admiral Kethvar stepped closer to the holographic display. And if we refuse your offer? Then you go home, and we pretend this never happened, Ambassador Vasquez said simply. Though I should mention that if you try to attack any more peaceful explorers, we'll have to intervene again, and next time we might not be quite so patient. The Emperor stood up from his throne and walked to the window of his throne room. Outside, he could see human ships working to restore power to his fleet. Young human technicians were moving between Zephyrian vessels, fixing systems and making sure everyone was safe. They're helping us, he said quietly. Of course they are, the ambassador replied. That's what neighbors do. Emperor Zarthul turned back to face her. Very well, Ambassador. The Zephyrian Empire accepts your invitation to join this Galactic Cooperation Initiative. Excellent. Ambassador Vasquez stood up and extended her hand. Welcome to the galactic community, Your Majesty. As they shook hands, the Emperor asked one final question. Just out of curiosity, what would have happened if we had actually threatened one of your core worlds instead of just an exploration? Ship? Ambassador Vasquez paused for a moment, then smiled. Your Majesty, that's one question I hope you never find the answer to. 3 weeks later, Admiral Kethvar stood on the observation deck of the Galactic Educational Station Perseus, watching ships from dozens of different species coming and going. Beside him, Emperor Zarthul was reading a tablet containing basic galactic law. "It says here," the Emperor remarked, "that there are over 300 species currently attending various educational programs on this station alone." "All of them former aggressors?" Kethvar asked. "Apparently so, though some are here voluntarily to learn about Galactic."